Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the first of two technical assistance webinars introducing the recently released U.S. Department of Labor, Employment and Training Administration Workforce Opportunity Rural Communities Funding Opportunity Announcement. As we deal with these unprecedented times, we wanted to let you know that DRA is here to support you in your workforce development efforts. Like most of the rest of America, DRA's employees have moved to home offices and are slowly starting to transition back, but we remain completely dedicated to assisting you. Because of the huge economic and workforce ramifications of COVID-19, we are putting our best efforts into creating content, training, and new ways to serve you as fast as we can. With that, I will turn it over to Chris Caldwell, Federal Co-Chairman of the Delta Regional Authority, to provide some opening remarks. Chairman Caldwell.
Hey, thanks. I really appreciate everybody hopping on today. I know that everybody's a little webinared out and probably tired of digital meetings, but this is a great program that RE and the team at DRA have worked really tirelessly over really the last several years. Now that we're doing round two, and I'm so excited to have y'all here participating and hear from some great speakers and presenters on some real practical advice and resources you can use in this program, and as well as this is a great example of federal cooperation too. Delta Regional Authority, along with the ARC, or cousin agency, FL Communications, and Department of Labor, as you all well know. And so programs like this are very physical behind the scenes to get you here. We have, and that's really due to the folks that you see from DRA today. But I just wanted to, challenge all of you. I know it's difficult. I know it's difficult for me to.
Thank you, Chairman Caldwell. As he mentioned, my name is Ari Kanglis. I'm a program manager with the Delta Regional Authority. I would like to introduce my colleague, Alex Holland, Senior Advisor here at DRA. We will be guiding you through today's webinar. I would also like to introduce and thank our good friend, Kagan Coughlin, co-founder and trustee at Basecamp Coding Academy. You'll be hearing from Kagan a little bit later in the presentation about his work in Water Valley, Mississippi. As always, I want to thank Kagan for joining us and sharing his wisdom and insights with you all today. As we move through today's webinar, if you have any questions, please submit those in the Q&A feature located at the bottom of your screen. Alex, Kagan, and I will address those questions in order at the conclusion of the webinar. For the next 15 minutes, Alex and I will give a brief introduction to the 2020 Work Initiative, including award and eligibility information. Along the way, we will be providing examples of how successful round one work applicants incorporated one or more of the eligible activities into their proposal. We will then turn it over to Kagan and hear about Basecamp Coding Academy and how he structured his response to the 2019 Work FOA. Next, Alex and I will take a deeper dive into the 2020 Work FOA, highlighting important sections, changes, and scoring criteria. Before we close, we'll open the webinar for Q&A. And then finally, we'll leave you with some additional resources and ways you can continue to connect with us throughout the application cycle. Before we begin, I'd like to briefly introduce you to a few acronyms that will be used throughout today's presentation. If any of the presenters use an acronym that is unfamiliar, please include it in the Q&A feature and we will be happy to clarify. For instance, throughout this presentation, I will likely either say FOA or FOA, which stands for Funding Opportunity Announcement. And not to get confusing, if I say WORC, I'm likely referencing the Workforce Opportunity for Rural Communities grant program.
Now to give an overview of the Workforce Opportunity for Rural Communities program. This initiative is administered by the U.S. Department of Labor's Employment and Training Administration. It is in partnership with the Delta Regional Authority as well as the Appalachian Regional Commission. These grant funds enable impacted communities to develop local and regional workforce development solutions that are aligned with existing economic development strategies and community partnerships to promote new sustainable job opportunities and long-term economic vitality. As background for this program, this $30 million was appropriated for this program initially in fiscal year 2018. So in last year, calendar year 2019 was the first time the WORC program funded projects. This funding for 2020 was appropriated in fiscal year 2019, and there is an additional $30 million that has been appropriated for fiscal year 2020, which will be next year's program. This funding came from Chairman Senator Blunt's Labor HHS Committee. This funding is split up equally between DRA and ARC, meaning there is $14.6 million available for the DRA region, as well as $14.6 million for ARC in this year's round of funding. DRA held workshops in Missouri, Illinois, and Kentucky at the end of February. And due to the current health crisis, we were unable to continue providing those technical assistance workshops throughout the region. That is why we are providing this webinar today, as well as a webinar on Thursday. These webinars will follow a similar agenda and will provide essential information to all of you as prospective applicants and partners. The U.S. Department of Labor will also be hosting a 60-minute webinar on Friday, May 29th at 12 p.m. and that link will be provided on all of our social media platforms as well as the DRA website. Additionally, ARC has developed a webinar series that is also relevant to both Appalachian and Delta applicants, so visit their website for more information on that. DRA will continue to create helpful resources for prospective applicants other than this week's webinars, and that will include short video clips to cover the funding opportunity announcement each section. DRA will also provide ongoing technical assistance to work grantees. In January this year, we brought together the 2019 work grantees as well as our 2019 Delta Workforce Grant Program grantees in New Orleans for a peer exchange workshop. And this provided time for grantees to meet each other, learn about other grantees' projects, as well as visit a 2019 work grantee on site to learn more about their Megatronics program, how they engaged employers and recruited apprentices. And that's something that will continue to happen over the period of the entire grant. During today's webinar, we highly recommend following the funding opportunity announcement, and we will send that link in the chat in case you do not have that in front of you. Susan, click back one slide. Oh, never mind, it's not included. Go to the next one. As a reminder, when you are getting started, please visit grants.gov to download the application. All of the materials will be there, and please review the funding opportunity and mandatory attachments, as well as checking sam.gov to ensure that you have an active registration if you are the lead applicant. Susan, please go back to the previous slide. The applications need to be submitted on grants.gov by July 29th, 2020, no later than 3 p.m. Central Time. There is a new guideline this year for the program. The Department of Labor will not accept hard copy submissions. There is some conflicting language in the funding opportunity about this, but I just want to remind you that they will not accept hard copy submissions. So please do not mail anything to any address at the Department of Labor. It must be submitted on grants.gov. So please ensure that you leave at least 24 to 48 hours to get that submitted. Last year, there were a lot of issues for folks submitting on the last day. So please get that submitted in a timely fashion.
Thanks, Alex. The WORC initiative takes a long-term view toward assisting eligible communities in diversifying their economies by investing in local strategies developed by regional partners. As mentioned, the goal of this grant opportunity is to create economic prosperity and gainful employment opportunities for eligible residents in impacted ARC and DRA regions, enabling them to remain and thrive in these communities. Successful applicants under this initiative will address all the following objectives in their proposed projects: implementing innovative, sustainable service delivery strategies, provide training, placement, and support activities to dislocated workers, new entrants to the workforce, incumbent workers, and those affected by substance use disorder. Align and integrate workforce development initiatives with state, regional, or community economic development strategies. Develop and expand industry partnerships, and provide or facilitate delivery of support services. As Alex mentioned, the total program funding is allocated equally between the DRA and ARC regions. At least $5 million of the total program funding will support projects that address employment and training for individuals affected by substance use disorder. The period of performance for these grants will be no more than 36 months from an anticipated start date of September 30th, 2020. This performance period includes all necessary implementation and startup activities, so please take that into consideration when developing your project timeline. Here you'll see a list of eligible applicants under this initiative. This list is not exhaustive. A full list of eligible entities can be found on page 7 of the funding opportunity announcement. And if you have any questions about whether your organization is eligible under this opportunity, please include that in the Q&A feature, and we'll be happy to address that at the end. Among eligible applicants listed on the previous slide, the applicant agency or organization must also demonstrate collaboration or engagement with at least 2 employer or industry partners, and should partner with other organizations serving the economic, workforce development, or other needs of the community the application proposes to serve. Applicants are also required to demonstrate that they will serve eligible participants who live in the ARC and or DRA regions. New to the 2020 WORC FOA, applicants may train eligible participants for jobs outside of either of the regions, so long as the applicant clearly demonstrates that employment in these occupations will not require participants to relocate outside of the region. Such jobs must clearly align with the overall intent of the grant application and the statement of need. This program does not require cost sharing or matching funds. Including such funds is not one of the application screening criteria, and applications that include any form of cost sharing or match will not receive additional consideration. Instead, the agency considers any resources contributed to the project beyond the funds provided as leveraged resources. Only one application from each organization will be considered for funding. If multiple applications are received from the same organization, only the most recently received will be considered. While only one application will be considered per organization, applicant organizations may be included as a partner on another organization's application. As I mentioned previously, applicants must propose a project that serves workers in one of the more one or more of the following three targeted categories: new entrants to the workforce, dislocated workers, and/or incumbent workers. Within these categories, you may serve a wide range of individuals, such as high school or post-secondary students, individuals requiring adult basic and other education programs, individuals with disabilities, veterans, individuals with limited English proficiency, and individuals impacted by substance use disorder. Allowable grant activities include training and work-based learning models, other employment-related activities, innovative service delivery strategies, participant support services, employer support services, and purchasing equipment and making renovations. As we move through the presentation, we will give a brief overview of each, along with examples of how these activities were incorporated into a successful 2019 work application. Keep in mind that successful 2019 applicants were often able to incorporate multiple activities into their project proposal. So first, we'll discuss training and work-based learning models. Some of the allowable training and learning approaches include, but are not limited to, traditional classroom training or work-based learning, such as apprenticeships or customized training programs. Important to our current circumstances is that these trainings can occur before or after a major layoff. So if there's an employer or a major industry in your region that is potentially going to be laying off a number of individuals, you can actually address that prior to the layoff in order to help facilitate reemployment. So two projects that were awarded under the 2019 application cycle that I'd like to highlight that incorporated this eligible activity was North Shore Community College and their partnership with GNO Inc. down in New Orleans. They were able to replicate an existing program and scale that to include additional industry partners. And then Hines Community College's MELTS program, where they're able to create and enhance a national model for manufacturing and logistics training. Other employment-related activities. Allowable activities include employment training such as punctuality, personal maintenance, professional conduct, in-depth assessment and evaluation to identify employment barriers and development of individual employment plans, and career planning. An example of an applicant from the 2019 cycle that incorporated this very successfully into their program was Arkansas Northeastern College. A major component of their ad work program was to facilitate peer coaching and counseling and mentoring, and also provide wraparound case management for participants of their training program. Innovative service delivery strategies that address economic and workforce-related impacts and aim to overcome existing challenges within ARC or DRA regions might include application of new business models, products, services, or technologies such as expanding broadband access, mobile service units equipped with technology-enabled solutions, industry-specific bridging programs, or developing new or enhancing existing partnership strategies for sustainable job growth. A 2019 example of this that I think was done really well was the Links project at the University of West Alabama, where they were able to develop a mobile training unit to provide customized training programs in advanced manufacturing and technologies. Support services are necessary activities or resources that enable eligible individuals to participate in career and training services or gain or retain employment. Applicants may propose to offer support services to participants directly or through partner organizations. Participant support services can include, but are not limited to, transportation or child dependent care assistance, stipends, wages, or other incentives. One thing to note is that applications proposing to include stipends or wages exceeding 20% of the total grant award must receive prior approval. An example of where this was incorporated into a 2019 project with Southeastern Louisiana University and their RNCAP program. They provided stipends for trainees and covered the cost of training supplies as well as certification testing. So for employer support services, applicants are encouraged to provide services to employers, particularly small and medium-sized employers. Efforts may focus on individual employers or have an industry-based approach for clusters or sectors, including but not limited to worksite peer coaching, counseling, mentoring, creating, expanding, or enhancing apprenticeships, including subsidies of apprentice and intern wages, customized training, and school-to-work type activities. In addition to meeting the workforce needs of these employers, applicants are encouraged to consider and incorporate, where feasible, other roles that employers may play in grant activities. So again, two projects that I'll highlight from last year's grant cycle. Again, the North Shore Community College Program and their partnership with GNOU and the GNOU Plus, where they were able to replicate and expand existing apprenticeship opportunities, as well as the Madisonville Community College Project, where they were able to meet local and regional employer needs by jointly creating and delivering a 4-week commercial driver's license training course in conjunction with and expanding their lineman training program. So purchasing equipment and making renovations. Capital expenditures such as these are allowable with prior approval from the grant officer. Possible allowable capital improvements include, but are not limited to, improvements to buildings or equipment that would materially increase the value or useful life, including the cost to put the asset or improvement in place. Minor alterations, renovations, or rearrangements of buildings, facilities, or equipment, if specific to the project, are also allowable with prior approval. Allowable costs also include leasing space that is used for grant participant education, training, and related activities, as well as the altering or renovating of such facilities. Please note that award of a grant under this FOA does not constitute prior approval of equipment purchase or renovation mentioned in the application. More information on eligible activities under this section can be found on page 12 and 13 of the FOA. And one thing that I would like to note, and will continue to emphasize, is new construction is not allowable, is not an allowable activity under this funding opportunity. So two projects that I'd like to highlight. The first one I won't talk about in much detail because you're about to hear a great presentation from Kagan on this, but one I'll highlight is the Panola County, Mississippi, the concourse and their partnership with Northwest Community College, where they were able to renovate an abandoned shopping center and turn that into a satellite campus for Northwest Community College. Now that you have an introduction to the WORC initiative, I will turn it over to Kagan to hear more about his work with Basecamp Coding Academy and how he approached responding to the 2019 WORC FOA. Again, Kagan, thank you for joining.
I'm sorry, Susan. It seemed I lost control of Zoom when I had control of your screen. All right. That's my share of technical difficulties. Okay.
Okay,
Thank you
Kate,
so
you
much.
should have control back.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for having me this morning. Sorry about that. There's a lost minute of my 20. What I would like to share with you today is the story of Basecamp Coding Academy and the 4 years that led up to our program being in a position where a WORC grant really helped us scale to the level of community service that we are hoping to achieve. So in a nutshell, Basecamp Coding Academy is a workforce development program. We are essentially a vocational school for underadvantaged students in Mississippi, focusing on what's considered a high-tech skill, so software development and coding. We identify underadvantaged youth in their senior year in high school through a relationship with the educators in our public school systems. They nominate a prospective candidate, and we thoroughly vet that young person. If we identify a strong candidate who does not have an alternate opportunity, so we are very specific about trying to add to the ecosystem of education and training opportunities. We are not looking to take students who already have a track or an opportunity. So if we find a strong candidate who does not have an alternate path, we put them through 2,000 hours of intensive training to become a software developer beginning immediately after high school. So there is generally a week between our students graduating from high school and beginning a 40-hour work week with us that lasts for 11 and a half months. We operate as a nonprofit, and we are located in a very rural town in northern Mississippi with a population of about 3,400. I'm going to see there seems to be a little time lag on the, there we go. That may switch again. I hit the button twice. So what we did is we seated our first class in 2016 after building a great nomination network with educators. That could be a counselor, an administrator, a teacher, a librarian in one case, in the public schools that are within a commutable distance of our location in Water Valley, Mississippi. And the way that we launched this program is we went to all of the business leaders in the state of Mississippi that had a need for what a program like this would produce, which is a capable first level software developer. And we talked through their business need. I should say that when I say we, I mean myself and my co-founder, Glenn Evans. Both of us have no background in education and nonprofit space or workforce development. We both come from the industry side, and our experience was the shortage of these skilled workers in our geographic space. So we went out to talk to our colleagues across the state and ask if everyone else was experiencing the same challenges. The data is easy to read. The statistics are pretty clear about open positions that have gone unfilled in various trades. The numbers were over 1,000 open seats for coders in the state of Mississippi when we started Basecamp. They haven't really changed. But we wanted to talk to the folks that were running businesses and see if that number was translating to a desire to solve the problem ourselves. And the answer across the board was yes. Companies were feeling the challenge of our geographic limitations and the skilled labor pool. And so we asked if they were feeling the challenge enough to fund essentially a research project to see if we could locally source using our own young people to fill those generally higher than average paying positions within the state. My wife jokes that this is the farmer's market version, locally sourcing skilled labor. And what we did is, because all of us have our business hats on, we did not launch until we had enough funding in place to run a 3-year pilot. We wanted to be able to stress test the system because we were not reinventing the wheel, but there were a lot of things that had not been tried before, particularly in this space and in this region. And we did not want the stress of finances and funding to impact our decision-making for the best outcomes for the program. So we successfully raised $500,000 from the private sector, and we went to work and went through 3 iterations of this training program, graduating 3 different cohorts. The curriculum was adjusted every year based on the outcomes. We really treated our program as a product line, with our customers being those companies that were going to employ our graduates. The entire intent was to create a system where everyone was going to win. So the students would gain a career opportunity, the employers would gain access to a long-term, highly skilled, locally tied employee, and we would operate as a nonprofit and be economically competitive with the other ways that folks have been traditionally sourcing high skilled labor, which is usually importing it from the coasts for our particular region. So the first 3 classes, the metrics that we tracked everything. But the one outcome that we wanted to aim for as our goal was an employed graduate. If the product was not desirable by the marketplace, then they would just no longer fund it, and the project would prove that this was not a viable system. That did not turn out to be the case. So these were the first 3 classes that graduated with much better than expected employment rates. The number of companies that participated in the employment process at the end of the year has grown each year, adding new companies. And we just virtually graduated the class of 2020 the Friday before last. We had concerns given the state of the world right now and the economic conditions. But as of today, 90% of the class that graduated the Friday before last has a paid internship or full-time employed position. The benchmark that we also tracked was the total cost to source, essentially from 0 to gainfully employed, valuable employee, is $15,000. And that is a competitive number from the business sector's perspective to relocating and paying sourcing fees to talent agencies. And from a public sector perspective, our graduates on average are 19 years old, and they are making between $48,000 and $52,000 at that age when they leave our program. So the return on investment from the public sector is about 14 months if you are only looking at income tax paid by these folks. And without putting too much of a hammer on it, these folks, the students that we target, are underadvantaged, which means traditionally they have been a cost to the public sector, and they are moving far to the other side of that spectrum by the time they're 19, at the beginning of a career that will span up to 40 years. So some of our students. Something to point out, and Ori and Alex both touched on this, having a community that is involved in your project, whatever it is, it's both practical, it's helpful, it facilitates all sorts of access to tools that are too expensive to pay for. So this is our community. We look to, on the left, these are the schools, the high schools that we work with today. In some cases, this is one person that is a staff member in that school that understands the students that we're looking for. In other cases, the whole school is very proud of the students that have come through our program, and they're all on the lookout. And we'll have some students prospective students that are nominated by 4 or 5 different staff members. The staff in our program is very key, particularly in the space that we work in. Coding skills are highly sought after, and the folks that are teaching for us, without exception, they could all make more money just practicing their skills. So finding the motivation for those folks that will bring them to help you in the space that we're working in is has been very important, and we're very grateful for all of them. I don't want to Northwest Community College at the bottom there. I can't overstate how important they have been as a partner. Both financially, they help fund one of the salaries of our instructors. They also put our students on their roles. And if you are a new program with a distance to go building trust with the communities you're working with, having the umbrella of that community college affiliated with what we were doing was hugely instrumental in getting parents and grandparents to be okay with us taking their young people for 40 hours a week for a year. And on the right side, these companies have both paid our bills to operate. They fund 100% of what we do here in partnership with Northwest. And they also employ our graduates. And that is the entire life cycle. It's the reason why we exist. And the latest, all of these are regional, with the exception of Facebook, who just came to join us, which has been very exciting. This is our board of trustees. We have one of the most hardworking, involved boards. They participate in interviewing prospective students, in conducting the quarterly evaluations of all of our students. We have, particularly as a new program, but also the space that we're working in, where there are not really any industry standard ways to measure skill in software development. Degrees have not carried the weight of, I can hire this person and they can come in here and fix my systems. It's really a prove your skill set. It's merit-based, which is why this opportunity has been so successful, I believe. Nobody cares where our students came from, what they look like. It is purely a measure of their skill set, but it means that their skill set has to be very strong. And so we have quarterly evaluations of our students, essentially quality control of our graduating body. And this board conducts those evaluations personally. This board is also largely responsible for contributing any funding or professional services that are not a classroom cost. So anything that is not a program cost up to this point in time has been funded by these 6 folks. So at that point, we had graduated 3 classes. I'm gonna check me for time. And we went back to all the companies with all the data we had collected and said, so is this a system that is working for you? Is this the way that you would like to continue sourcing your new staff? Are the students performing up to your expectations? And honestly, is the cost still in line with your business needs? And the answer across the board was yes. We honestly, the request was we need more and faster. So we started brainstorming on how do we scale up this program without watering down the quality control and the care that it takes to take a student from 0 to professionally prepared, mature, and skilled to the level that their employer needs. And while we were in the midst of this brainstorming session, the community college, Northwest, came to us and said, so if you are going to grow, could you find a place where we can join you? We operate today in Water Valley, Mississippi, which is in Yalobusha County, Mississippi. And Yalobusha County is one of the 11 counties that Northwest serves. But historically, there has never been in the county any post-12th grade education or training of any kind. Base camp is the first. And adding to that, 6 or 7 years ago, for various political reasons, the GED training programs were all shut down. They used to operate out of the high school, and it became a situation where if a high school assisted someone in the community in getting their GED or some commensurate certificate, that counted against their future funding. So the programs were all shut down. So essentially, after 12th grade, or if you left high school, there was 0 opportunity to learn a skill of any kind within the county. So Northwest came to us and said, if you can find a place where we can cohabitate, we would love to start up these programs and we can cross-pollinate. For our program, that meant a whole new source of prospective students. If we could bring in folks that did not have a high school diploma, which today is a requirement for incoming students, if we could have someone walk into a building and get whatever they needed as a precursor to our program, that would expand the number of folks that we could reach out to. And there are also cases throughout the year where our program does not turn out to be the optimal fit for one of our students. And so we transition them today, we transition them into Northwest, into other programs that they offer. But that is usually a transition requiring a 50-mile commute to Senatobia, which is Northwest's main campus, which is a whole barrier. It's one of the main reasons why we exist in this rural community. So that opened up the floodgates to a big space with all sorts of training programs that both are complementary and not. Just, we should be able to provide anyone who walks through our door a path to a higher level of skill and a higher earning potential, which meant we needed a big space. And that's where the dream for Everest, a facility that would host all of those functions, came together. So we have, like many rural communities, this giant factory, which has been empty since the 90s. It happens to be in the middle of town here. And to renovate that into a new asbestos-free, dry and warm and lit safe space with classrooms, it was going to take $4.7 million, which was an order of magnitude beyond anything that we had considered, and was a number that was not tied to our operations. So we have had great success in funding our operations, almost 100% on corporate donations. And we intend to move forward under that same funding model. So how do you find $4.7 million in a rural community with 3,400 people? And it means getting creative. So we went out to everyone and everywhere. The first step was getting the community to donate that empty factory building. It was owned by the municipality, and the donation turned into a $10,000 purchase, but it was as near a donation as possible. We looked at some very complicated tax credit programs and were able to pair historic tax credits and new market tax credits. We had a wonderful relationship, have a wonderful relationship with USDA, and received 2 different grants. Those were less tied to the facility and more to the technology that will facilitate distance education. Appalachian Regional Commission came through. Delta Regional Authority came through. This was wonderful. We sit in one of the counties where both of those organizations overlap, and they joined forces on this project and each contributed the same amount. Tennessee Valley Authority is a federal energy company, and they have some wonderful programs to repurpose any building, historic building that has essentially not paid a utility bill in a while. So that helped. And we came to the point where we had come so close, within about 10% of being able to pull this off. And that was when, the timing was great, when the WORC project program came out, was announced. So just a quick recap, we also raised enough private capital. These are 3 of the companies that have helped fund Basecamp since the beginning. And they contributed $650,000 collectively. And then we had our operations pledged by these 5 companies. So when we were looking at our financial needs, it did not include any operating costs. It was simply closing the gap to complete the renovation. And I'm going to speed up, Alex. This was a breakdown of the types of programs that we plan on implementing. Coding is at the top. This is our Basecamp Coding Academy. Some of these, the next 3 categories, are in the tech space, and we will be leading the development of those with the community college. And the rest of these are traditional offerings from the community college that simply have not been geographically available. So this is where we were. We were at 86.5% funded. And the gap was exactly $635,000. And we pursued a WORC grant for that amount. I'm going to, Alex, would you like me to go through this process? Do we have time?
Yeah, you can do an expedited version.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, so the grant has changed a little bit, but these are essentially the 10 components. And I will be full disclosure, this was my third grant I had ever been the lead writer putting together on. All three were written last year. So if you have not written grants before, it is attainable, it's accessible. The instructions are very clear. It takes a while to coalesce in your mind. But these are the 10 components. These components, Alex mentioned this as she was talking through, are the practical steps. It's collecting information, it's registering on the federal sites, it's getting all of your unique identifiers, making sure that you have a good cohort and you can demonstrate that you are not sitting alone somewhere hoping to get a large check, but you have a group of folks that are all participating and excited about whatever you're up to. And the rest of this is documentation. This is the hard part, and I just learned from Ori and Alex that the hardest part about this was this limitation. So this was the opportunity to explain everything about what you intend to do, how you intend to do it, who is going to help you achieve your goals, and the challenges that are making it in your region, in your area, something that is unique and critical for the growth and success of your community. They have taken away this 10-page restriction, which is wonderful. But this is where you will spend 80% of your time clearly articulating exactly what it is you intend to do, how you intend to do it, and then the outputs and outcomes, which I'm sure Ori and Alex will help define, and determining which is which. So if you put this together clearly and everything has been designed in your mind and on paper, then the last three components, the abstract, the budget narrative, and the project timeline, are all derivative of that narrative. And that was kind of the home stretch. I spent, honestly, 80 to 90% of my time on that project narrative. And working with the folks at Northwest and with the business partners that we've worked with over the last 4 years to be able to very clearly say exactly what our goals were and how we were going to achieve them in the context of employed folks after the fact. Our metric is we can add skills all day long, but if that doesn't translate into a higher wage and a guaranteed wage moving forward, then we're not doing something right. And then last piece of advice, the grants.gov website is notorious for locking up on the days that submissions are coming in. So if you can upload the day before, I highly recommend it. So this is just as a quick snapshot. This is the inside of that facility. January 24th, we had our groundbreaking. And this is miraculously, given all the world's challenges right now, the project itself is 1 day from optimal schedule. It's humming along. Everybody's excited. The energy in the community, the amount of drive-by traffic to see that this opportunity for everyone, no matter what their age, is going to be in the middle of town and online this fall. It's a wonderful thing, especially given what everything else in the news is making us feel. And that's my piece. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kagan. Again, thank you for joining us. We love hearing about the work that you're doing down in Water Valley. And now that everyone on the webinar has had an introduction to the FOA and have heard from Kagan and about Basecamp Coding Academy and Everest, Alex and I are going to transition into a section by section discussion of the FOA and review the requirements and contents of a competitive proposal. As a reminder, any questions that you have as we go through this process, include those in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. So here is the application screening criteria. And as Kagan mentioned, they've slightly updated the approach. There are multiple approaches now that you can take to completing this funding opportunity announcement and submitting your proposal. I'm going to address the traditional route that Kagan took and talk about it in a little bit more detail, and then Alex will address the new opportunity that's provided under round 2. So DOL ETA has instituted a technical review process that reviews applications on the merit of the proposed project scope and objectives. It is important that you understand the standards and requirements your applications will be judged. And as you develop your application, we strongly encourage that you utilize the checklist included on page 8 of the FOA. As a reminder, applicants must serve workers in one or more of the following 3 targeted categories: new entrants to the workforce, dislocated workers, and/or incumbent workers. And one more time, I will just rehash the allowable grant activities that are included under this funding opportunity. And if you have any questions, again, include those in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. So here's the scoring criteria. The project narrative must demonstrate the applicant's capability to implement the grant project in accordance with the provision of the FOA. It must provide a comprehensive framework and description of all aspects of the proposed project. It must be succinct, self-explanatory, and well organized so that reviewers can understand the proposed project. The project narrative is limited to 10 double-spaced, single-sided 8.5 by 11-inch pages with Times New Roman 12-point text font and 1-inch margins. You must number the project narrative beginning with page number 1, and materials beyond the specified page limit will not be read or considered. So first off, the statement of need and strategic alignment. The statement of need is the foundation of the application and must clearly explain the reason for the proposed project. It must also support the grant initiative's goal of creating economic prosperity and gainful employment opportunities for eligible residents in impacted DRA or ARC regions so that they may remain and thrive in these communities. The statement of need must describe the need for assistance, the nature and scope of challenges to overcome, and the consequences of not addressing that need. The needs described must align with the targeted population served. And here are the major emphasis areas in the statement of need and strategic alignment. So first, the description of community or communities and their needs. The region, you must identify the region served by the project, including the required supporting documentation used to identify the region. And you must address the region's economic and workforce challenges, the consequences of not addressing those challenges, and the required documentation identifying those named challenges, something like including the region's unemployment rate. Next is the demonstration of inclusion of an opportunity zone. Applicants must demonstrate at least one census tract in the service area is classified as an opportunity zone. That's if applicable. This is not a requirement, but 2 points will be awarded to your application if you can identify a census tract in your service area that is determined to be or is designated as an opportunity zone. Next, the description of workforce needs. The extent to which your application describes the workforce needs of at least 2 identified employers and the specific skills gap to be addressed by the proposed project. You need a letter from at least 2 employers this year. Last year it was just 1. This year, at least 2 letters are required from industry partners. And in those letters, they must describe the specific skills training needed for anticipated future job placement at that employer's company. Next, the target population. You must identify the intended population to be served through the grant, including any supporting information on why this population was selected. And you must also identify them under one of the 3 worker categories: new entrants, dislocated workers, incumbent workers, as specified in the FOA. And then also you must address how you plan to recruit this population for their program. And then next, I will transition over to Alex to let her talk a little bit more about the alignment with strategic plans.
Thanks, Ari. So for those of you who applied or reviewed the funding opportunity announcement for the program last year, you might remember that you had to align your project activities and goals with 3 plans. This year, the Department of Labor added 1 more plan, and I just want to emphasize that the alignment with strategic plan should be the most concise portion of your application, because this can take a lot of room in your page limitations and also in the attachment A, which we'll discuss later. But you must align your program with a local or regional plan. If your area does not have a local or regional plan, some other exceptions are made to where you can use a Chamber of Commerce, their objectives and goals. If you have any specific questions about what plans might be appropriate for your program, please feel free to reach out to us. You must also align your project activities with the DRA Federal Plan. Fortunately, improving workforce competitiveness is one of 3 goals included in that plan, so it shouldn't be too difficult to align your project activities. You must also use the DRA State Plan. Each DRA state, as well as ARC states, have a state plan that aligns with the federal plan, but also uses some state-specific goals and objectives in that plan. Those plans, the federal plan and state plan for DRA, are all included on the DRA website, and we will also provide that link to you all in a follow-up email. And then lastly, you must align your plan or your project activities with the WIOA State Plan from 2018 to 2020. We'll also provide that link for you to reference. Next is the project description. This is worth 30 points and is arguably the most important part of your application. As Kagan mentioned, the project narrative is where you will spend most of your time making your argument for why your application is competitive, what the needs are of your local area, the employer needs and skill sets required to hire, but also the partnerships that you're able to develop to communicate that or demonstrate that your project is going to be sustainable and long lasting. So I'm going to go into each of these into detail on the next 2 slides. The project design itself is worth 20 points, and there is a lot of information that needs to be including here. And that is all of your planned activities and how you will implement those. They must align with the needs and challenges that you indicate are prevalent in the region that will be served. You also need to connect with the primary work initiative goal, and that is to increase economic prosperity and also provide gainful employment opportunities for people to live and thrive in the DRA or ARC regions. You also need to address the skills gap, and that means including letters from employers that demonstrate their need in certain skill sets in order to expand or enhance their business operations. At the end of the day, this program is all about connecting people to jobs so that they can continue to remain in their communities. We need to make sure that the project activities also align with the project timeline, which will be an attachment to your project narrative. So make sure that those are consistent, and that is the same with all of your project activities should be reflected in your budget narrative. There were some applications last year that included certain activities in their budget narrative, but didn't describe that in the project activities within their project design. And that raised some eyebrows for reviewers, so please make sure there's some consistency there. And then you also must demonstrate that you will be able to implement this in a timely manner within that 36 months period of performance, and you need to indicate that you will achieve your desired outcomes and results. And while Ari will discuss outcomes and outputs and sustainability shortly, I do want to mention that that is also a very important part of the application, but I want to make sure that we are, as applicants, putting down realistic and attainable outcomes and outputs, because if those are not achieved, that can result in the Department of Labor looking less favorably on your organization's applications in the future. That's something that is mentioned in the funding opportunities. I just wanted to point that out. And the project partners is worth 10 points in the scoring criteria. You must provide information for each partner and describe the roles that they're going to take. The Department of Labor values high engagement from employers, so not just letters that demonstrate the need, but also how are they going to be involved in developing training or curriculum? How are they going to be part of the program? Are they taking in interns or apprentices or those who can have some on-the-job training? Are they going to be providing some mentorship or instructors to assist with the training? Also, the strength of the partnerships. There were several applications last year that just listed several partners. And while it might look good to list a lot of different organizations, it actually raised more eyebrows as well, because there was no indication that the partners would actually be part of the program. So make sure, even if you have a large coalition of partners, that you narrow it down to those who are going to be most significant and participate in your project activities, what their roles are going to be, how they're going to assist, what resources they might provide, and how that aligns with your overall program, as well as the supporting documentation from the employers, those letters of engagement, and also other partners that you feel are most significant to your program.
Thanks, Alex. And as you mentioned, we're going to jump briefly into project results and sustainability. And also, this is a very important component of this year's funding opportunity announcement. This totals 30 points, and you can see the breakdown here. The applicant must clearly state expected project results that are specific, measurable, achievable, and reasonable according to the project design and timeline. And as Alex mentioned, just because you state in your application that you can train thousands of people during the grant life cycle, reviewers are going to take a very strong look at whether, given the project scope, that those outcomes are ultimately realistic. So your project results must include short and medium term results that include outputs and outcomes achieved by the end of the grant period, and long-term benefits that include outcomes expected 5 plus years at the end of the grant period to demonstrate sustainability. Outputs and outcomes achieved by the end of the grant period must include the number of participants obtaining new or improved employment opportunities. So at a minimum, when you're thinking about outputs and outcomes, you must include the number of participants obtaining new or improved employment opportunities. And so we get, last year there was a lot of questions around what was necessarily an output or what was versus an outcome. And this is a table that is provided on the FOA, but we thought it worthwhile to include in this presentation to give an example of what the department is looking at when thinking about short and medium term outputs, and then ultimately short and medium term outcomes. So we'll just follow the first row all the way across. So the short-term activity would be 1 GED apprenticeship program developed, and then a medium-term output would be 100 workers or trainees served. Then transitioning over to the outcomes, these short-term results must correspond with the identified output, and then they must be achieved during the grant life cycle. So a short-term result would be 100 workers training, needing basic education, obtain a GED, and then a medium-term result, which would be achieved by the end of the grant cycle, would be workers, trainees, improved skills and basic education knowledge. So long-term benefits, sustainability and long-term impact are important to the work initiative this year. The applicant must clearly identify the anticipated long-term benefits for the participants, employers, and communities served by the grant, explaining how the activities and investments made under the grant continue to benefit the workforce and the economy 5 years after the end of the project. The applicant must also explain the plan to sustain the work of the project after grant funding ends. Major emphasis will be placed on the description of a reasonable outlook for the project 5 years beyond the period of performance, the demonstration of project sustainability, and specifically anticipation of receiving additional grant funding alone does not suffice for sustainability. So organizational, administrative, and physical capacity is 10 points, and that's broken down into 2 different pieces. The applicant must demonstrate capacity to carry out the proposed project effectively. So major emphasis will be placed on the submission of staff resumes or job descriptions for new positions that will need to be hired to complete the proposed project. And then completion and or submission of one of the following: a financial system assessment form, which is located on pages 42 through 44 of the FOA, the applicant's most recent audited financial report, or the IRS Form 990. And next, we'll talk briefly about the budget and the budget narrative. This is 12 points. So incorporated in the budget and the budget narrative is the SF 424, the application for federal assistance, and the 424A, the budget information form. The applicant must demonstrate that the items included in the budget are consistent with the project narrative. The applicant must complete the SF 424A budget information form and have an associated budget narrative that provides a description of the cost associated with each line in the 424A. And on the right side of the screen, you'll see the budget narrative, and those are the associated line items in the 424A. It must separate the primary cost components of each line item, which when added together provide the line item total. It must also provide the basis for the cost and the function or use of particular items. You need to note that the 424 and the 424A in the budget narrative must include the entire federal grant amount requested, not just 1 year. And also do not show leveraged resources on the 424 and 424A. Describe any leveraged resources in the budget narrative. The budget narrative should also include a section describing any leveraged resources provided to support grant activities that include both cash and in-kind in excess of the award.
As Ari mentioned earlier in the webinar, we do have another option in lieu of the project narrative, which is page limited to 10 pages, double space, 12 font. This is attachment A. You'll find this in the funding opportunity on pages 53 through 72. And I will say that, frankly, while we cannot require you to use attachment A, it will help you organize your thoughts in a way that is, we believe, easier than it is to put everything together in a blank project narrative while addressing all of the points including in the funding opportunity. Optional attachment A actually has each section broken down, all the information that is required for you to concisely describe within pages 53 through 72 of that attachment. Again, this is just something that can be submitted in lieu of the project narrative, and additionally, some of the requested attachments. So at the end of the day, if you are using attachment A, you will be submitting less attachments than you will be required to submit with a blank project narrative. There are 2 mandatory forms that Ari mentioned, and if you have applied for a federal grant before, these are not new to you, but an SF 424 application for federal assistance and also your budget in the SF 424A. Those are the 2 standard forms required, and you will find this reflected on grants.gov under the application package. Now for the requested attachments, if you are to fill out a project narrative on your own, not using the attachment A, you will need to include the designation of ARC or DRA region. So even if, in the case of Kagan, being located in a county that is covered by both ARC and DRA, you still have to choose one of those regions. So you will have to follow the guidelines in the funding opportunity as far as how they want you to describe it. You'll have to designate with a statement. You must also include an image of the map that shows the service area of your proposed project, not the entire DRA region, but the service area of your proposed project. We will have an example of that included on our website, which has a lot of resources for this program. You'll also need to include an abstract, and while the omission of an abstract will not be reflected in your score, this makes it easier for the grant officer to ensure that you are eligible and have everything in your application package. There's a 2-page limit, and I'll go over in more detail what is included in an abstract, but essentially it's a summary of your project. You'll also need to include a project timeline, indicating all of the activities that you included in your narrative. You will need to provide evidence of required partnerships, and that is at a minimum at least 2 employers that will be engaged on your project that demonstrate the skills needed in the service area. If you have a negotiated indirect cost rate agreement, you will need to attach that agreement to your project narrative, as well as key staff resumes or job descriptions if you plan to hire to support the activities in the project narrative, as well as your financial system assessment, whether that be the general form, your most recent audit, or the IRS Form 990. In the abstract, this is included in the funding opportunity, but you will need some of the most basic information, including your name, the project title, the area to be served, and funding requested. But you'll also need to indicate whether or not your project is located in an opportunity zone. And while that is not required, you will receive points if you are located or serving an opportunity zone. You'll need to indicate the type of participants to be trained, and that includes that list of 3 different individuals, being dislocated workers, incumbent workers, or new entrants to the workforce. Make sure 1 or more are listed. You'll also need to list the projected number of participants that will obtain new or enhanced current employment, and then your brief summary of the project, including your scope of work and your proposed outcomes. Now, this is showing you the submission with a project narrative versus using the attachment A. And to make this easier, we actually have a checklist that we have created. We'll provide that to you on the website. It's not necessarily something you can find in the funding opportunity, but we created a new resource for you so you can clearly see what you need to submit with your project narrative if you select that route, or if you use the optional attachment A. Required if you are submitting a project narrative is the SF424, the SF424A, your budget narrative, the applicant designation, including your map of service area, an abstract, project timeline, evidence of required partnerships with at least 2 employer letters, your indirect cost rate agreement if applicable, key staff resumes or job descriptions, as well as your financial system assessment information. And you'll see with the asterisks on each of these components are those that are required with the attachment A. And you'll notice that the ones without the asterisk there denotes what you'll also have to submit with a project narrative. So essentially you have to submit everything with the project narrative and only those denoting an asterisk for attachment A. And again, we will provide a checklist for you. For the application review, you can refer to the funding opportunity. There is a table in section 3C1. You must have all of this information. And again, that includes some of the components like your SAM.gov registration. You have to have a DUNS number. Please take a look at that checklist, because if you fail to include any of those components in your application will not be reviewed. Your applications are reviewed by a panel. Some DRA staff will be included on that, as well as other outside experts. who typically review applications for the Department of Labor. The federal grant officers will also review applications to make sure that you are eligible. And the total number of grants awarded will depend on the number of competitive applications and the amounts requested. And one thing that is new this year is that the funding amount or range is between $150,000 and $1.5 million, where last year it was $150,000 to $2.5 million, which is why you saw the limited number of awards in the DRA and ARC regions. There is still priority on all size awards. There is no preference given to lower or higher awards. If you have specific questions about the funding opportunity, while DRA is happy to answer some questions for you, technical questions should go to the Department of Labor. We worked with Jennifer in order to put this funding opportunity together, and she is excellent. She knows the funding opportunity in and out, and she was also a lead on the review panels last year, so please use her as a resource. If you have questions about projects, feel free to reach out to workforce@dra.gov. On the website, dra.gov/workforce, there's also a form that you can fill out to schedule time to discuss project-specific questions. And now we will jump into the Q&A, and we're going to start with questions for Kagan that we had received. Kagan, we have a question that says, you mentioned quarterly evaluations. What percentage of students have not completed the program?
Good question. Thank you. So we've had 4 classes complete the program to date, and the graduation rate has been between 50% and 88%. It's changed every year. It hasn't trended up or down. The reasons are very rarely based on those quarterly evaluations and quality control. The students that we work with, it is life debt. So it's something outside of our sphere of influence. Oftentimes it's family needs, either assisting at home or need to generate revenue, even at a lower amount immediately. So we continue to try to expand our sphere of influence, but it's a tough space. And there's always challenges that we learn about, new ones that we haven't been able to overcome.
And is there any affiliation with the name of your program and the online program? Probably the most common question you get.
There is not. No, there is not. Unfortunately, it makes trademarking difficult for our program.
Do the schools identify need for pre-enrollment mentoring system, a pre-enrollment mentoring system?
That's a great question. And I'm sure that some of our nominators are on the fly doing a little bit of that work. What we look for in incoming students is not technical preparation. So honestly, the schools that we work with don't have the staff skill base to convey anything that would help from a technical perspective. What we need is work ethic and a proven track record of sticking with something that is challenging. And that is absolutely in the sphere of influence of our teaching professionals that we work with. There's nothing structured, and I think that would be a great conversation and something to develop just across the board, not specific to what we do at all.
And last question for you, how many months did Basecamp take to complete from start to finish?
So the first time we talked about anything like Basecamp was in May of 2015. We spent the rest of the year going through the formation and the fundraising. We hired our first employee in January of 2016 and started recruiting, and our first class was seated in June of 2016. So 13 months from having the idea over beverages to a classroom full of students.
And I lied, I have one more question for you. How did you recruit your designated population?
lots of time spent going to them and going to schools. And we've tried things that have worked very well, getting permission from the administrators to speak to the entire teaching staff at a staff meeting at a school. We don't reach out or try to recruit specific students. We try to recruit someone who knows the student situation and can help point them out to us. We've also put in some effort with religious organizations, youth programs, coaching, athletic type of scenarios. We are looking for someone who has a longer term relationship with a prospective student, because we get, even with our vetting process, we get at most 2 hours of interview time spread between a couple interviews. And that is a hard thing to gauge as a student. You know, if you're going to invest whatever amount of time and money into someone, you want to make sure that they are going to meet you at least halfway. So we look for help with that assessment. And that means anyone that can be a youth leader in a church, but oftentimes it's someone in the school system who has exposure to prospective students.
I think this question might be targeted towards you. It just came in. What was the biggest challenge in this overall process?
So practically, there's a lot of nitty-gritty moving parts. The nonprofit status for an education program in Mississippi was challenging to get from the IRS, just based on historical issues in Mississippi and schools that were established to avoid integration. So that was an unexpected long process. But most of the practical setting things up, they're simple problems. Well, they're not simple problems, but they're problems that can be defined and solved. The challenge has been when we run into a student that does not cross the finish line for things that are entirely out of their control. And that is one of our biggest concerns, is burnout for our educators, for our staff who spend 8 hours a day in the classroom with our students. It's just a difficult when you're working with students that are fighting so many societal and institutional challenges, to know that there is, if they could just walk down this path, they could walk through all these things and avoid them. And for reasons that they don't control, it's not possible. Or we don't have the tools in place right now to make it possible. And that it's taken the largest toll on our staff, honestly, on our board. And it's just to have a sufficient number of wins and to find medium level wins. So we do try to make sure that every student that we have a relationship with, even if they don't cross our finish line, they are better off for the exposure. So we have, both through the program and just personally, all of us that are involved, assisted in various ways to help someone find an alternate opportunity if this one is beyond their ability to complete.
Thanks, Kagan. Looks like that's all of the questions for you. So some questions that we have as well. How can we get the recording? This recording will be available on www.dra.gov/workforce. You'll also notice a tab that says 2020 resources. There is a wealth of information and hyperlinks that will be useful as you begin to develop your applications. There's also links to last year's grantees, so you can see a summary of the projects that were successfully awarded. As well as links to, Census Bureau and Bureau of Labor Statistics if you're collecting information on your community, as well as presentations from the workshops that occurred in February. Next question is there a preference regarding how it is submitted, using a form or no form? And I believe that question might be indicative of submitting a project narrative or optional attachment A. While, again, we cannot require you to submit one or the other, neither will look more favorably. We are just recommending using the attachment A because it is easier to collect your thoughts and address all of the components of the funding opportunity. So you will not look favorably either way, and there is no official recommendation or preference. Do your proposed projects need to serve the target areas identified on page 4 of the NOFA exclusively, or can other areas be included? If I am to go to page 4, I believe you are referencing the Appalachian region and lower Mississippi Delta region. Those state maps are found on DRA.gov as well as ARC.gov, both of those websites. You'll notice that each region covers certain portions of the states included in the region, although I believe ARC covers West Virginia in its entirety. The employers and the training can take place outside of the region so long as participants are able to commute in a reasonable fashion. That does not mean hours and hours, but it might mean, reasonable might be defined as 30 minutes to 90 minutes or 30 minutes to 2 hours, depending on what reasonable might be defined in your region. And the participants that participate in the training programs must be able to secure employment and still be able to live in the region. So while it might seem a little bit limited in that fashion, this is actually a broadened feature of this funding opportunity. If we use attachment A, which is 20 pages, is the 10-page maximum waived? Yes, the 10-page maximum is waived because you will not be completing a project narrative in Word form. You will be able to fill out the form as it is shown in the funding opportunity. However, there are certain components of the attachment A that do have word limitations, so please be mindful of those when you're submitting. Last year, there were a handful of applications that provided more than the 10 pages for the project narrative. The attachment A was not an option, and the department ended up cutting the pages that were beyond the 10 pages. Some folks also used smaller font. The department went ahead and changed it to the appropriate font and margins, and again, reviewers had to stop reviewing at 10 pages. So that was detrimental to those applications. Is attachment A of the FOA available in a document format or only in PDF? That's actually a great question. I do not have the answer to that. We can double check with the department to see if that can be provided in document format. They might say only PDF so that you cannot manipulate the document, but we will we'll make sure we ask and that is addressed. Is it necessary to be located in a rural community to be eligible for this grant? If so, how is that proven or determined? Actually, no, and while the title of the application, the program might be a little bit deceptive, you do not have to be located in a rural community. However, the original intention of the program was to serve those residents who might not be served otherwise because they are located in a rural community. There is no additional points if you are located in a rural community, being, federal definition 50,000 or less. So you can be serving urban and rural communities. Are C6 organizations eligible to apply? Based on the funding opportunity, which defines those nonprofit organizations without 501c3 status as determined by the IRS, 501c6 organizations should be eligible, but if you'd like to double check, there's, it's always good to check with the grant officer, which is Jennifer McHenry. I understand there is only one application allowed per organization. Would a center or department within a university count as its own organization, or does it fall under the broader umbrella of the university? It's a good question. It's going to depend on if the center is treated as its own entity, if it has its own DUNS number, if it is registered separately on sam.gov and has a different registration than the university. However, I will say that an organization can be a part of more than one application, but cannot be the lead applicant on multiple applications. They will take the most recently received application if you are to submit as the lead applicant on 2 applications. If you want some additional information, again, I recommend reaching out to Jennifer McHenry, the federal grant officer. Are all parishes in the state of Louisiana eligible for work funding, and must participants work as well as live in a DRA state? I will address the first part. All parishes in the state of Louisiana are not covered by DRA. DRA covers most of the state. However, if you are putting in an application for an organization that is within the region but serving participants that might be trained or employed outside of the region, so long as they are able to commute reasonably to and from work and able to continue to remain and live in the region that is eligible. I don't believe that participants can work as, or I'm sorry, it says, and must participants work as well as live in a DRA state. I believe that participants must live in a DRA state or A or C state if they're being served by this program. I think I would need some more clarity on what the more specific question is for that. Dale Ash, I see your question here. Your project is scheduled to begin August 1 through September 1. Should we apply knowing that the project will take 1 year to complete, finish fall of 2021? Dale, feel free to send us an email and let us know about your specific project. The period of performance is 36 months, and so you'll have to begin drawing down funds within that period. It's also important to note that equipment purchases cannot be made in the last year of the grant. Let's see if we answered. Okay. Our program is a pilot that targets depressed Crossroads, Forest City, Helena, any Delta location. Do we need to attain 501c3 status first? Yes, if you are submitting an application from your organization, you must have 501c3 status, or if you're a nonprofit without 501c status, that just means that you are not a C3, you might be a C6 in that instance. So you will need to document that you are a recognized organization. We'll give a couple more minutes if there are any other questions. It appears that might be everything. Again, if there are specific questions that you have about your program, please email workforce@dra.gov. If you have specific questions related to the FOA, Jennifer's information is on grants.gov. Under this opportunity, you can just search WORC, W-O-R-C. All other resources are located on dra.gov/workforce. We appreciate you joining today. We know that this is a lot of information, and we hope that we are able to provide you with a good overview of everything that is in the funding opportunity. As a reminder, we will send a follow-up email to all prospective applicants with the resources discussed in today's webinar. You'll receive the presentation as well as the funding opportunity and grants.gov link. The contact information for the grant officer, Jennifer McHenry, SAM.gov registration information, a checklist for grant submission, including whether you're using a project narrative or attachment A, links to DRA's Regional Development Plan 3 and state plans, as well as application package materials, and that's just your SF424 and SF424A, as well as that link to DRA's resource page. So you remember dra.gov/workforce. If you have additional questions, please send an email at workforce@dra.gov. Thank you everyone for joining today.